guests. So we have with us the person who organized the trip, who was the founder of Yuck Yucks, the incredible Mark Breslin. And we have three super hilarious comics who you just saw in the film. Please join me in welcoming Aaron Berg, Rebecca Kohler, and Jean Paul.
She brought me a drink. That's great.
Hi, everyone.
How are you? Nice to meet you, Mark. Meet you. Nice to meet you, Rebecca.
Hi.
Hi. Oh, who brought him? Hi. We'll share one.
Are we on?
Okay.
Well, congratulations. That was a great film. Huh?
Thank you.
Great film. So,
Where are the chairs?
there are some chairs.
It's like being back in Israel.
But I want to thank you for asking me to do this. You said, just be like Jay Leno.
Yeah.
So I came in, Alan told me to do 2 questions, and then I'm fired.
Okay.
And then we're going to open it up to the audience, and I'm sure you have a lot of questions. But Mark and I go back about, 40 years?
Close.
And
35 years.
Since I've known you, you've always wanted to provoke change through free speech. Did you do it? Did you do it in this film? Did you really get what you wanted in this film?
It's hard to say. I mean, we went to Israel. Most of the audiences we performed for, unfortunately, were not really native-born Israelis. There were a lot of Canadian and American transplants that kind of came to the shows. They already knew what they were coming to see, and they were nostalgic for it. So it didn't really prove the point I set out to prove. But it was still lots of fun to do, and I think that we did have that thrill of relevance that we had when we opened up Yuck Yucks back in the 70s, where everybody was on edge all the time because you never knew what people were going to say next.
But some of this, watching the film, some of this reminded me of Yuck Yucks when you started out.
That's right, and that was the great feeling about it for me, was to encounter that all over again. And I haven't experienced that since Edmonton in 1985.
Why don't you, my question was, how did you finally select the comics to go on the trip that you did? I mean, you selected, well, and they were great, and congratulations. But, coming from a career of 50 years working in comedy and all the comedians you've known, how did you choose each of the comedians and introduce them? Well,
sure. Well, first of all, when I went to the Israeli consulate, I said, I've got a great idea. We're going to bring these Jewish comics to Israel. And they said, no, please, no Jews. I said, what do you mean no Jews in Israel? They said, look, we already have their support. So clearly they were looking for a more multicultural experience. And I had to fight, actually, to get Jews into the show. Finally, I said, you've got to put one Jew on, because otherwise that will be anti-Semitism. And they said, okay, we'll do that. And then I said, well, wait a minute, that Jew's got to have another Jew to talk to.
right.
So I had 2 Jews.
You need a minion.
That's right, so I had 2 Jews. So what I tried to do was to try to make it as cross-section as possible of Canadian comedy, and have some from the West Coast, have some from the East Coast, make sure it was gender balanced, make sure there were people of color. And so, not everybody can be here tonight. I just want to say that Nikki Payne is in Nova Scotia right now. Sam Easton is in Vancouver. Would be lovely to see him. I think that Michael Curtis is here in the audience. Are you here, Michael? Where are you, Michael? There's Michael. Sit down, please. You're not invited on stage. Thank you. But the whole thing could not have been done without Michael, actually, because when I went to the consulate,
Come on,
stay. Down. He's Israeli. Down.
Could you move him 1 row back, please? I'd feel more comfortable.
Michael kept at us for this project because he really believed in it, in some ways even more than I believed in it. So Michael is really to be thanked. And so is Jeff Silverman, my business partner. I'm taking him back, and he was instrumental in all of it. Anyway, so we do have 3 people on stage, though, who are in the film. Rebecca Kohler.
Thank you. Hi.
And Aaron Berg. And Jean Paul.
So my question to the 3 of you would be, the movie started out with Carlin's quote that a great comic has to find the line and then he has to cross it deliberately. Did you find the line when you were over there, and did you cross it?
For me, I think in the beginning I didn't, and ironically enough, the incident that happened in East Jerusalem is what woke my comedy brain up, and it was like, you know what, just do what you do, and it made me remember why I got into comedy, which was for the love of it, and something I still love and I'm passionate about, and so I think I did.
Aaron?
I intentionally went over, and I think I was chosen to go over to cross the line every night consistently and not compromise. And some nights it worked, and some nights it didn't. But I think I was up there to show what Yuck Yucks does, which is total censorship-free comedy. And I try to do that every night.
Let me ask you a question. There was a line, I think it was Rebecca, you were talking with Odelia, and she was saying that you can't do politics in Israel, that you stay away from it, which I found, ironic, since here is, or especially in the States, that's what most stand-up comics are doing, is all politics.
Yeah. Well, and I think what she was saying was that it's more, I think because politics there are, here we're like, well, not to downplay Canadian politics, we have some serious issues. The tar sands gross. Gay marriage, yeah, we have it. Anyway, but so there's serious stuff, but we watched 22 Minutes, and it's like Stephen Harper spent $5 on Staples, and there it's like people are dead, and so I think people want to go to a comedy club and really just laugh and not talk about that. I think that's what her point was.
Yeah.
Which I don't know enough about. I mean, there are helicopters and weird airplanes flying across the sky there all the time. It's like part of, and you're reminded every time, like, oh yeah, bad things really do happen here. So I guess it's more of an escape thing there. And here it's like, let's relive the stupidity of our everyday life. No offense.
And was it hard for the three of you? Because, I mean, if you're playing Toronto, you play Sudbury, New York, Montreal, and you have to write for your audience, you have to prepare for a new audience every show, you have to know your audience. What was the preparation? What was the process involved going to Israel?
I went in with nothing, completely ignorant, and I was like, I'm just going to show up and try and pick it up as I go and just be in the moment. And I failed horribly at that. And
I think that's true.
I just did my act. I mean, I barely altered it until the end, and I was like, if my act works in England and in North America, it'll fucking work here, and I'm going to push it through and make it work. JP went the exact opposite way.
I initially, I didn't do any preparation. My initial thing was, I'm going to be away for 8 days from my wife and children, so I'm going to sleep in. So that was mostly what I was thinking. But as I got there, like I said, when the whole thing in East Jerusalem happened, we were seeing and experiencing so much that how could you not want to talk about, all that was, the influx of what was happening, and it was almost like I was just bursting to get it out, and I was like a kid at Christmas. I was just so giddy to try new material on people I had never seen before, you know what I mean? Except, when I hang out at Bathurst, but other than that, it was a fantastic experience, and it has actually totally recalibrated my comedy, and it's woken me up.
It seemed to get to you. There were moments in the movie where you seemed quite affected and changed by your experience being in Israel.
Lauren, I'm a deeply unspiritual person.
Yeah.
I have almost no feelings of spirituality whatsoever. And to see other people feel that way was very moving.
He was ready for that question, you could tell. There's also criticism. I mean, I read 3 reviews over the weekend preparing for this in-depth interview. And they were all glowing reviews. And one said that criticized you for that the film was a propaganda film for Israelis.
I'd like to fight back on that.
No, the film was not. The film was a propaganda film for Yuck Yucks.
So in the film, at the end of the film, you say, we were here, I think Aaron said it, we were here to push buttons. But just like I asked Mark, it seemed that he was changed by the experience. So, Anthony, did you feel you pushed buttons, or were there buttons pushed within you guys? Because it seems there were.
It was very reciprocal. Like, I offended a lot of people, but I think a lot of them were North America. Like Gil Troy, who wrote an article, and then there was another very Orthodox Jew, David Weinberg. David Weinberg hated me, and we were at this pool party with the Canadian ambassador. That sounds so fucking... All right. We were at this pool party, and then, of course, Benny Hill showed up.
The ambassador is really hung.
And he came up and he said, I don't like what you're doing. He didn't sound that New Yorky, but you get the point. He was very frummy. And he was like, I don't like what you're doing. It's offensive. The accent's getting worse and worse. We talked about my accent problems. So, and he's like, you're just horrible. You're offensive. You just talk about your schmeckle. He called it my schmeckle. And he said, there's nothing beneficial about it, and it's offensive. And I said, well, what you just said really offended me. And he said, really? I said, no, but holy fuck, it was boring. And I walked away. But I grew up Reform in Toronto, and now I joined a synagogue, and then I booked a TV show so I don't have to go anymore. But it was like... it was a scary few weeks.
You said you only believe in God when you need something.
Yeah, he came through on Yom Kippur. Really big.
I thought what you said also was quite profound in the movie, where after Sam's Jerusalem or Israel bump, where they left, and you said, we're the comics, we're not the map guys. We don't fix the map.
Smart, smart comic.
And especially in the Mideast, when that's what it's all about now. It's all about the map.
Yeah, it's all about the map. I mean, I could have said it probably more succinctly than we're not the fucking map guys. I don't know if that's what they're called. Probably topographical experts or something like that. But
did your act change when you got there in the beginning to the end? Did you feel, because you were there, the act you started, your comedy personality started to blend in and the act changed?
It became more present, and I talk about I have so much envy for what these two did, because they were constantly writing every day and throwing new stuff in that was happening. Then, like, John Paul has like this 15-minute bit on climbing Masada, and here, I'll tell you.
Yeah.
So it was a brilliant piece, but
no, like I said, so much was coming at me that, if it's one thing, and I'm hoping that you can tell from watching the film that I'm extremely laid back, and in being laid back, I take in a lot of my environment, and it was a lot to take in, and I came back raving about Israel. Like, I was just like, I gotta go back. I want to bring people. I want to bring more black people. This is gonna be awesome. It'll take a little while at the airport before we get through, but once we get out, it'll be awesome. The energy of the people is what struck me the most. I'm so not that guy who buys into the politics of a country. I buy into people, and that is how I try to go through life. Call me ignorant or whatever you want. So I experienced so much that I couldn't not find the beauty, and because I find humor beautiful. I find comedy beautiful. And I actually have one of my favorite bits to do right now is pretty much my closing bit, is actually a bit about the Wailing Wall. So later on, I'll do about 7 minutes, and you guys will get a chance to see how brilliant it is. So stick around. No, I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding. I'm not doing 7 minutes. It's more like 15.
So, Mark, what about you? Did this experience change you?
All right, no.
No, I can see it.
In what way, Lauren? What changes did you see it make in me? Come on. This is what everybody wants to believe. I was buttonholed at a party for the film festival by somebody a couple of days ago, and they just kept saying, well, hey, this must have completely changed you. I said, no, not really. It's beautiful. The place is beautiful. I'd never been there before. Well, it was probably completely different than what you thought. I said, no, actually, it was exactly what I thought it would B, I've done some reading. I've been on the internet. And I've spoken to people who have been to Israel, and it was what I thought it would be. I've always been a moderate Zionist, and I still am. You know, I think the place is great, and I'd go back if it weren't so far, because it's far, and I'm not much of a traveler.
So
I need a reason to be somewhere, and the fact that I was working there was the motivation to go there, and if I hadn't had work to do there, I might not ever have gone.
So wouldn't there be plans to open up Yuck Yucks internationally after this experience?
Well, you know that comedy's gone global, and that there's a comedy store in Mumbai, and that there's a whole circuit of English-speaking comedy in Scandinavia now, for instance. In Dubai, there's a whole series of places that English-speaking comics play regularly. And I thought maybe Tel Aviv would be a place for it. But to do that, you need a local scene. When we got there, I don't think we found that the local scene was ready yet. A polite word would be nascent. It's a nascent scene, and it will take some time. But it'll probably happen.
But you thought the Israelis were ready for Nikki Payne.
Absolutely. And if they weren't, that would be just as much fun. You see, if we succeeded, it would be great fun. And if we failed, it would be maybe even more fun. And in some ways, when we had those disaster shows, and they weren't all disaster shows, we had a great time.
Right.
We just had a great time.
We all laughed more than we'd laughed in years,
Yeah.
just together, like children. Like it was this newborn sense to us. It was the most fun time.
Now, did you write your joke at the end, which I thought was a highlight, about the translator and the...
Lauren, do I look like I can afford writers? No, of course, yeah. I wrote it.
That's great.
And the blonde woman in the front row, there's a story about that, but I can't say it in front of people.
Say it.
She ate my ass. She ate my ass.
Maybe you shouldn't have said it.
You're right. I shouldn't have said
Are
it.
your parents
My
here?
mistake.
Aaron?
No,
Okay.
they're gonna watch the cut down version on Thursday.
Do we have a question from the audience? We know? Yeah, of course we must.
Yeah, I'd say that, okay, close enough. Not quite, but close enough. Correct. Yes, it was, I think. And I mean, especially the first show we did, as we said, old people and their parents. That's not our target demographic in any way. It would have been better we would have loved to have reached young Israelis, but we found out that young Israelis now, English isn't necessarily even their second language. It might be their third or even their fourth, because the demographic of Israel seems to be changing, and it's no longer European. They had people who solicited those groups on our behalf, and I'm not sure exactly how they found them, but a lot of those places were community centers, and the word got out through them. But there was a show that was not shown here, which was a university show, which was also a great show. We just didn't film it.
Next question. Lady in the back. There you are. Yeah. Stand up.
Stand up.
Stand up.
Who are you with? Are you with Revenue Canada? Because they're following me on Twitter.
Would you repeat the question so the people in the balcony can hear?
Can I repeat the question? I could. Where did we get the money for this? Okay, the answer was some of the money came from the CIJA, Canadian Israel Jewish Affairs. It's a lobbyist group, and some of the money came from the State of Israel itself, and some of the money came from investors that we found for the project.
And the bake sale we had.
And the bake sale. Wow, home and Tushin can really move. If they're made out of prunes.
Next question. Yes, sir. How did you feel about using religious humor that would offend some sensibilities?
Well, humor that would offend. So not humor about religion, necessarily. You mean like sexual humor? Well, I don't know if this applies to your question. I'm not absolutely clear. But I think they showed the joke where I called the crowd Christianly challenged. And I thought that was really interesting because I do that joke here sometimes, and audiences actually go, ooh, as if I actually think that Jews are Christianly challenged, as if that was an actual thing. And that joke did better in Israel than it's ever done in Canada. So I find that really interesting, and I mean, I touched on religion there, I guess. I don't know if that answers your question, but I almost feel like they were more game to make fun of that kind of thing.
What was the difference going in and playing in front of crowds like that? Because a lot of you mentioned about hatred, about it being tense. What's the difference preparing, going out in front of that kind of an audience when you feel that way? Does that, for any way, hold back your freedom to be a comic?
It feels like an uphill battle going into it. When you look at a room like that and you start to learn after years, you don't prejudge an audience. But you look at that room, that first room with the walkers and all these gimpy people with hip sacks in 2012, and you're like, okay, I really got to prove what I'm made of. And it feels like an uphill battle, which isn't the best. It feels like you're showcasing for these people all the time, which isn't necessarily the most creative mind space to be in.
I take solace in comedy. So knowing that it was going to be tense, I think I found comfort just being somewhere familiar, which is this box that I'm on with a mic stand. But I also took solace in working with comics like Rebecca and Aaron is being pretty humble. He was one of the people that throughout the entire trip that literally stuck to his guns, and it was actually pretty inspiring for me to just watch him completely not give a shit about whether people were going to like him, love him, or hate him. And I'd like to think it inspired everyone to just be like, let's just do what we do. So,
Did it inspire the other comics that you met? Because they themselves were censoring themselves, or the club itself was censoring them. So did that affect you in any way?
You mean to see people censor themselves?
Yeah.
Not really. I just, again, I figured they have to do what they have to do from where they're at. And I can only do what I know. So I got why they did it, but, it's kind of like being a white comic in a black show. You're not going to drop the N-word. I mean, you can, but you're probably not going to get out. So you kind of got to do what you got to do sometimes. So.
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, in Canada, in America, you're not going to get physically attacked, or you may get attacked by the media after the show as a comedian. There's this sense of being safe within the comedy club. But did you ever feel going into those situations that your personal, physical, or maybe even career safety was on the line in that moment?
I can't speak for anyone else, but I could almost attest to 100% certainty that I'm probably faster than everybody in this room.
The show in East Jerusalem got much tenser than I think the movie showed. And I think there was a couple of moments there when we thought that it might actually turn physical.
God is upset.
Don't talk about Bella Stein, Mark.
Check, okay. Well, I'll switch it back to you, Lauren. Why do I get the dead mic? We never thought that there would be any problem with religious Jews because the Orthodox don't want to hurt you. They just walk out and shake their heads like they're your grandparents. You've disappointed them somehow, but that's all. We never felt any sense of danger in any of those shows, did we? No. But the Palestinian show got really tense. I mean, it was at that point where people would come right up to your face, like this far, and yell at you. Nobody touched you, but they were this far from your face.
And there was
good.
an interesting thing that wasn't included in the film. I was wearing a Canada-Israeli pin that was given to us when we first got to Israel, and I was asked to remove it in East Jerusalem.
And the same night, in the same place, because didn't Nikki, the same thing happen to Nikki when she went to the bathroom as well?
Oh yeah, she got, was that in the movie? Because they did go pee.
Because
Okay.
when I went to the bathroom and came back, I literally was called over by, like I said, the two chicks and the dude, and the chick, she was American, and she was like, "Here, have a seat," and then I'm like, "No, I'm good," and then she was very insistent that I have a seat. She's like, "Sit down," and like I said, I for certainty know I'm faster than pretty much everybody in Israel, and I'm like, I'm not sitting down because it's hard to run when you have to get up. So, and they literally accosted me and were like, "Talk to us, we'll give you some history, what you did was ridiculously offensive, and you should be ashamed, and blah, blah, blah," and it was all I can do to pretty much tell them to go fuck themselves, basically, you know, so.
Yeah, say the word fuck. I like that.
It's a universal language, Mark.
Yeah, and bluer. We're not sure whether the title, Universal Language, is supposed to be taken straight or ironic. Ironically, we're not really sure, because it's supposed to be a universal language. Humor is a universal language. We're not really sure that it is. We kept bumping up against everybody's agenda. We didn't go with any political agenda. We went with a cultural agenda, but we didn't go with a political agenda. But when we got there, everybody else sure seemed to have one. Now, the part of the East Jerusalem story that isn't in the movie for some reason is the unofficial Israeli media response to what happened. Somehow, some journalists got a hold of the story immediately after it happened and then wrote this incredible editorial in the Jerusalem Post about how this evening proved that the Palestinians weren't ready for statehood because they were so rude. And you can check it out. It's by a guy named Gil Troy, and I think it was also carried in Canadian Jewish News, but I might be wrong about that. He might have changed the article somewhat for that purpose. But all through the rest of the tour, I was on my cell phone doing call-in shows in Israel in English, talking about this thing that had happened and how this just proved that there was a problem with the Palestinians. So the point is, everybody there has an agenda. Everybody has an agenda of something.
There's also some very funny...
Very awkward moment.
Well,
Very awkward.
I live in awkward moments. There's some very funny outtakes on YouTube already.
Not that I know of.
Yes,
Okay.
and about 4 or 5
Here are a
years.
few, so.
And I suggest you go to YouTube and see some of them. If you love this movie, there's still more to be seen.
Oh, great. I didn't even know.
Yeah.
That's great.
Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, for Rebecca, do you feel like it was, I mean, I assume that as a woman, it's different to go on stage and talk about sex, and like you probably get different responses, but specifically in Israel. I'm Israeli and I know it's different to be a woman and like be exposed that way. What was your experience?
I think it is, that's a good question. I was thinking about this earlier. I'm kind of a neurotic, and I judge myself, and I do things, and I think, why did you do that? And so my entire stand-up career, I've written jokes that I like, that I feel uncomfortable telling. So I'll be like, oh, is this racist? But I tell it anyway. And it's worked so far. So my answer to your question is I think that the stakes probably were higher there. Probably I was offending more people than I would offend here. But my psyche is always the same, which is just to disapprove of myself. So that stayed level, even though the audience on the outside might have changed. But the second part, because I like to talk a lot, the second answer to your one-part question is that, I mean, I think Odelia and I talk about this, that she feels, we had a whole conversation about anal sex. I don't know if she would love that. She said it on the documentary, so I'm going to say it here. She said, I have anal sex, but I feel uncomfortable to discuss it in public. And fair enough, and no offense, everyone. I feel like this is one of the crowds from the shows in Israel. So, but it was really, she said, I would never talk about that on stage, and that's what I was saying about, I say, it might be a little, I think women are judged faster. I don't think it's harder for us. We had a big conversation about this in Israel. We got into a fight. But I don't know that it's harder for us, but women, there's immediately oh, a woman, I can't believe she said that. Look at Margaret Thatcher. Ding Dong the Witches, they called her the Iron Lady. If she was a man, they would just call her a man. Anyway, that's what I have to say about women.
Those are good things to say about women, by the way. We keep talking about offensive as if that's a bad thing. I think offensive is a good thing. That sound of offending people, to me, is a beautiful sound. It's a sound of people being challenged. It's a sound of people being asked to grow and change. If you're a traditionalist, then that probably doesn't turn you on, but I'm not. So I've lived 35 years trying to do that every day of my life. And on a completely different topic, Yisro Campbell is in our audience, and this guy is so funny. Just stand up and please take a bow.
Fantastic.
It was really great spending time with him. And if you've never seen his show, you must see it whenever you have a chance.
It's like the Ed Sullivan Show.
In what way, Lauren?
We used to point people out in the audience. Yeah. Let me ask you something. Was it hard to have a camera on you 24/7? I mean, apart from having to do comedy every night in clubs?
As a black guy, no. It's just stat quo. It's really funny because I've watched reality shows and people will say stuff like you eventually don't realize they're there, and actually after a while I just stopped realizing that they were there.
Yeah, at first it was slightly awkward, and then you're just like, that just be us, and it alleviates itself automatically.
Yeah, it had to be difficult going into the museum and then, walking out and having to be, funny. That must have been impossible.
Yeah, we mentioned that right after. We're like, all right, let's go fucking kill now. This is awkward.
Aaron, do you remember what we did that night after we had the show? Did we do a show that night? Or was that a night off?
Yeah, we did a show.
Where?
We went somewhere and did a show.
Was that the open mic night?
Might have been.
Yeah, it would have been really hard to do a show after
Yeah,
that.
but we did do something.
It would have been really hard.
Yeah, we watched Sam cry the whole way to the show. It was awkward. Dude,
I think they're
he was
mocking
really
Sam.
moved. Yeah, we're making fun of Sam. And why did he not have any shoes in any of those shots in the movie? Did you notice that? The fucking Patchouli, Vancouver people with no fucking shoes in Stanley Park was sitting around.
What was Tullis doing in your dressing room?
I was doing a one-man show at the time called The Underbelly Diaries, which was my one-man show that we did off Broadway. That was about, and I opened the show with the Thomas scene from my bar mitzvah, and then it goes on for me stripping and doing other kinds of very reformed Jewish things. Very reformed.
Is safe to say the title is the universal language? Did you find, after your experience, it's a Barbara Walters question, that comedy is still a universal language?
Well, I think what's interesting is that comedy is subjective. And so we can call it a universal language, that it can go across any border, and I think a lot of it does. But then I think within any border, half the people aren't going to like it. So it's it's a universal language in that there's always going to be someone who likes it and always going to be someone who doesn't. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Or ma'am, sorry. Right there.
It's a woman.
It's a woman. I said ma'am.
She's quite attractive.
No, we have him. He's here. We got him out. He's starring in a movie called 42. The Jackie Johnson story.
Yeah, I've actually changed my name to Shekels Jackson. That's my...
I would like to hear the rest of the woman's question.
Whoa.
Well, racism ended in the world when we came back. It's the sequel. And I actually ended up joining a synagogue in New York. I observed Sabbath the first weekend I got back, like full out hardcore. And then the second weekend, I was dating the shiksa, and I was like, And so I'm like, I can't do anything, but can you toast me a bagel? And then, so she would do that, and I'm like, I need the lights on in here. I can't fucking read! You stupid boy! And then by the third weekend, I was back just like eating ham and fucking, so it kind of, I mean, it had an influence, but I dabble back and forth now.
Well, I'm not Jewish, although I wish I was. And I did try to convert when I got back, but the rabbi said no once, and I gave up. So no, I think when you go to that kind of place, you wonder, like, am I going to change? It's going to be meaningful. I'm going to see old things. And it was all of those things, but I also think in general, in my life anyway, things happen and you wait for a change and nothing really happens. But I think the changes are kind of tiny ripples under the skin or brain. And I'm sure I've changed in some way. I think I appreciate cobblestone more. I don't know. It was an amazing trip. Like it was the best trip I think I've ever been on in my life, and I've traveled a lot, not to brag. And it was absolutely fantastic. But I don't know that I can say like I changed this way. But it was great.
Great. Yes, sir. Do you want to take time to study for that?
No, I think that's an interesting question. That was my hope that it would happen that way. But I think that the people are doing that, the comics who are doing that in Israel, are doing it in Hebrew. And I don't speak a word of Hebrew, so I couldn't really judge anything. I couldn't say whether it was good, bad, or in between. But that was my hope.
Yes, sir, in the red sweater.
The itinerary was put together for us. We didn't choose it. In retrospect, I think it was the right way to do it. Jerusalem was a real shock. And when we got there, I can't speak for everybody, but I didn't really like it because I'm not a religious person. And I was offended by it in many ways. I thought the people were, sort of superstitious. And then we went to Tel Aviv, which is the kind of place that I would normally think I would like. And then I started to miss Jerusalem a lot. So I'm not sure what to make of that. But I'm glad we did it that way rather than the other way. I think if we'd landed in Israel, gone to Tel Aviv, it would have been too much like, somebody said going to Miami, and it really doesn't, it even looks like South Beach. Even the architecture looks like South Beach. So I'm glad we did it in that order. Is there a reason you think we did it in the wrong order?
No, because in the next you started with the soft ones to work them in, so I thought Tel Aviv would have been easier.
Oh, I see. Yes, but then what happened the way that we did it, it turned out that the best shows were in the end. And really, that's the way you want to experience, your performance, rather than have a couple of good shows off the top, and then everything kind of runs downhill. It's too much like life.
Did you guys research? Was there a lot of research in what you did before you went off?
I did 0.
Yeah, same. I did 0 just because I wanted to experience it as organically as possible.
Me 3, nothing. I was afraid if I researched too much, I would get in my head. I just wanted to do what I did and hope it went well, which it did thing.
Open table guide to Tel Aviv restaurants. None of which we wound up going to because they only took us to kosher restaurants.
That's Thomas of my life.
And if I see another flank steak.
We have to wrap up. So, in closing, I'd love to get some closing remarks from the three of you, and then lastly from Mark.
It was absolutely phenomenal trip, and realigned so much of my life. We're so thankful to have gone. I think the shows could have gone better. I really don't like Orthodox people that dislike me and tell me to my face. I mean, couldn't you just hold that in and let it fester into anger and just cause more problems in the Middle East? But like, I don't need to hear that. Overall, I loved it.
Same for me. I had no idea what to expect, but I was completely blown away by just. I'm a huge fan of people in general, and I know, like I said before, it sounds pretty ignorant, but I had the best time hanging out with Palestinian people, hanging out with Israeli people, and this is going to sound crazy, but watching people at the Wailing Wall of just different denominations. I found was just a beautiful sentiment as far as I was concerned. Whether you're into spirituality or religion or not, just seeing people believe in something side by side, I just found there was something intrinsically beautiful about it, which is how I kind of see comedy as well. You sometimes see people with different comic sensibilities standing side by side on stage. That's what I got from it.
I don't know how to be deep right now, so I'll just tell a small anecdote. And this is why I really like the Israeli people, because they're kind of rude, but they're honest. We would do show. You can't ask a rhetorical question as a comic on stage. You can't say like, "It's a really nice day." They'd be like, "No, it's just raining." So. But one of my favorite stories is our tour guide Abby, who was featured in the film. We were at a restaurant, and there was a strange-looking meat in the shape of a ball. And I said, "Oh, is this chicken hearts?" He said, "No, this is balls." And he was like chicken balls. I was like, "They don't have balls." Anyway, it was some animal balls he was trying to tell me. He was like, "This balls, it's delicious, eat it." I was like, "I don't think this is balls." I tried to go to the kitchen to ask them, and I knew the word in Hebrew, beit seam. "Is this beit seam?" And the chef was like, and Abby was behind me going, and I couldn't get a straight answer, so I saw there was this table of two women eating quietly in the restaurant, and I went up to them, and I was desperate. I said, "Is this balls?" And I said, "My tour guide said, is this balls?" And they looked at that, and she said, "No, this is chicken heart. Ball looks like ball." And that was my favorite moment in Israel.
It took about 4 to 5 years to put the trip and the film together, and there were many points along the curve that I was going to give up and just figure it's just not worth it. But in the end, it felt worth it. I'm really glad we did it. And thank you. If you have friends who might want to see this, it's on CBC in 4 days, on Thursday at 9 o'clock in the Doc Zone. The only thing is it's a 45-minute cut. And so there's a lot of the language and comedy that's actually taken out because it's CBC, and they can't show that stuff. So it's really weird in that cut because you see people saying, "I can't believe you said such things," but you don't know what the things are. But
You're doing Jackie Mason.
But everybody's doing Jackie Mason. But it's still on CBC. You'll still get a taste for it, and I would imagine it'll DVD eventually. So anyway, thank you for your interest in the film.
Thank you for coming today.
Toda, people, toda.